Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the Wednesday, August 7th meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority. We would invite you to stand and joining us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our safety first minute will be by Amy Cornell Titcomb, who this is our first, at least that I can remember, and welcome.
Thank you. So August is National Family Fun Month, and it's a great time to enjoy family and extra fun and activities. So here's 3 tips to stay safe. Be smart about swimming. Drowning is the leading cause of injury or death among ages 1 to 14, so always supervise your kids or grandkids. Don't let bugs bite. Zika, Lyme disease, and West Nile come from mosquitoes and wood ticks. Wear bug spray and eliminate standing water. And then stay safe in the sun. Be careful and stay hydrated, and don't forget the sunblock.
Great. Good advice. Thank you very much, Amy. Welcome. Next is public comments, and Bob?
We don't have any today on the agenda. Any other comments get forwarded to the board.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next item is our approval of our minutes from our July the 31st meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of our July 31st meeting.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. We would, before we go to the agency report, we would note that this is our last formal meeting, having our interim executive director, Steve Meyer, here. And Steve, on behalf of the board, we plan to roast you in a number of different ways before you actually exit the building, but we just want to thank you for both stepping in before we came along and certainly for remaining afterwards when sunnier weather called your name. And so we're glad to still have had you help us through this transition. So thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Why don't we go to your agency report then, Steve?
Thank you, Chair. A couple items this morning, just an update on the University of Utah Union Building bus bay construction. Team's been meeting with the university. They've got to consensus on the design. The design's been approved. Still working to close some of the gap on funding. They hope they're meeting again this afternoon and continue to work forward on that. And contractors got the plans. They're ready to start work as soon as that gets resolved. So I'm hoping we'll hear some good news, later this week and get that going.
What will they do from change day on? I mean, do they have an alternative plan B? And
we're gonna let Mr. Turner come up and talk to that. He's just back from a meeting this morning. So.
Morning, Gray.
Morning. So the change day being August 11th, and then the University of Utah starts school on the 19th. Contractor we're waiting to get a couple formalities taken care of before they can begin. So in the interim, our buses are on a detour route. Basically, instead of dropping off in front of the Student Union building on that loop, they will pull around that loop and drop off on the east side of that loop where you pull into the parking lot currently. So there's a sidewalk along there. We'll be sharing that between our buses and the used shuttles. So
it could be worse.
Could be worse. There will be construction during school when the students are in. It's going to be about probably a 5 to 6 week, anywhere from a 4 to 6 week construction schedule. But the contractor does have, we have committed to have a lane of traffic open around that loop at all times. Part of the construction is an access road, a new access road into that parking lot. They're going to do that first and get traffic on that as much as possible, because we think that once that happens, that'll take a lot of traffic going around that loop into the parking lot. So
Good.
So the timeline, 5 to 6 weeks, so that's with all of that they need to get done. And now that school will be in session during most of that, that's still a good timeline.
Yeah, and we're still, regardless, the U is working with us quite a bit as far as being when school is in, even during that first week. We'll have it, the contractor has developed access paths and points for the students to walk past there. It'll all be fenced for the construction. We're hoping to get all the heavy, the excavators and the demolition done before school starts, so that when school is in, then it's more of the concrete work and the finishing, to where there's more of just, 3 or 4 concrete trucks a day instead of the big excavators and dump trucks and things like that going up there. So
Well, good luck with that.
it'll be fun.
Hope the rest goes well. Thank you. Anything else?
Yeah, there was one other item. We had last week, the Federal Transit Administration and their consultants were in town to do an audit of the State Safety Oversight Program. And that's UDOT providing that service as designated oversight of our light rail safety systems. And it's a triennial. It did go on a little longer than the last one. The last one was held in 2015, but they pushed it to 2019 because of some new certifications that were required. But it went really well. We have a great relationship with UDOT and work well together. And that was one of the comments from FTA and their consultant was the working relationship between UTA and UDOT. They said that not all in-states enjoy that kind of relationship. And I believe that's true, and I think Utah is a unique exception where all the transportation entities really do work well together.
I'm guessing getting along doesn't mean they just give us a pass
No,
when we have a problem.
it very much not the case. So they bring up issues, but we work hard to work
Through those
together
issues.
and resolve them. They had one minor finding UDOT did from the feds, and they will trying to clarify that. We think it's just a misunderstanding on that. But we expect a final report within 45 days. We'll share that with you at that point. And they sent their thanks to the UTA team that participated, and everybody was very open and it's a good working relationship through that process.
Great. Thanks for that update. Please, Beth.
Steve, I just had a quick question. Where's the status of the VW settlement? Is that, where's that at?
We're hearing that they're pretty close on that, so we expect some formal announcements here, hopefully within the next month.
Thanks, Steve. We'll move forward to item number 7, which is a resolution establishing oversight of the pension committee, and we'll turn to my colleague, Kent Millington, to talk about this a little bit.
Mr. Chair, as we move to this new governance structure, it's become necessary to put into place some resolutions that establish processes for oversight and reporting procedures, especially as it concerns the pension and 457 pension opportunities for all of our employees. This resolution establishes proper oversight. It establishes the fact that the pension committee will report back here to the board on a quarterly basis. The results of the pension activity and seeking authorization for any such approvals that are necessary by the board for the pension committee to continue its service. I serve as chair of the pension committee, and so I will be the one responsible for bringing those quarterly reports back to the board and seeking proper authorization for the pension committee as necessary. So I would make a motion that we approve this resolution establishing the oversight of the pension committee by the Board of Trustees.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? I would just, thank those both from our from the ATU and others who are participating in our pension committee for the work they do. I know that the solvency of that is of utmost importance to us, and I know we're continuing to work to improve that circumstance. It's in a stable condition, but we want it to be ideal and before it's all said and done. And I know Bob and his team have been working hard to get us to that point. So appreciate your work on that, Kent. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 8 is a resolution approving international travel to the 2019, I can never say, Relocation Conference in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I will just kind of speak to this, and my colleague Beth Holbrook has expressed interest in this. This conference is really held nationally in multiple places, often ideally places with transit, and I know through the years, it's been in Portland, it's been in a number of communities and this particular go around is in Vancouver, which despite the international travel line is probably as close as other points in the United States, and but based on our policy for any kind of international travel, this item needs to come to the board. Any discussion, or Beth?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to acknowledge that I have expressed the interest in attending this conference that kind of focuses on transit-oriented developments, and as such, I will be required to recuse myself, and I will exit the room at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Just note that Trustee Holbrook has recused herself, and with that, I would entertain a motion on this particular resolution.
I make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we approve the resolution.
I'll second that. Any other?
And this will be for both Trustee Beth Holbrook and our TOD project manager, Jordan Swain, to attend this international conference on TOD.
Thanks for that clarification, Kent. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote's unanimous. Thank you.
Bob, do you want to invite Beth back in? Thanks, Beth. We're moving on forward to item number 9, which is a resolution authorizing construction amendments under the construction manager general contractor contract for the first last mile connection program with the Tiger grants. And Mary?
Good morning. So you're all familiar now with the Tiger First Mile, Last Mile project, and we have a construction contractor, Granite, who is performing all that work. And we entered into a phase 1 contract with them in April of 2018 with a contract amount of $297,000. And the phase 1 contract said we would enter into amendments for phase 2 projects as they were ready to move forward. So the amendment process, what we do for each project is we get the project designed by our design contractor, and then once it's designed, it's released for review and bidding. The contractor prepares their cost estimate, and we prepare an independent cost estimate. Then we negotiate the price. And then it comes, if it's over $200,000, it comes here to the board for approval. So far, we've issued 10 phase 2 amendments, and they total about $8.4 million, and that included 81 Tiger projects. We anticipate this year having another 75 projects that will be completed for a lot of little UTA projects, which include wayfinding signs, bike parking, bike repair stands, bus improvements. And the value of those estimate at $8.3 million. So what we're asking, and we did a similar resolution in 2018 for all the 2018 projects, what we're asking is for authorization of the interim executive director or the executive director to execute those phase 2 amendments throughout 2019 without coming to the board for specific approval. Any of those amendments would have to be within the project budget, and the stakeholder matches would have to be, covering the local match portion, and then it would come to this board for informational purposes as well on a regular basis. Any questions?
Mary, what happens in the scenario where it exceeds, the estimates are all the estimates? I mean, are all the final bid known, or would there still be some bid work?
They're not all known because they don't get estimated until the design is complete. If it exceeds the project budget, then the stakeholder is required to pay that additional, or we reduce the scope.
Okay. Otherwise, it would have to come back to us.
Correct. If we wanted to put more UTA money, it would come back here.
Okay. Any other questions for Mary, though? Okay. I entertain a motion on this particular resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 2019-0803, authorizing construction amendments under the Construction Manager General Contractor contract for the First Last Mile Connection program of projects within the Tiger Grant.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion to that motion?
I have an additional question.
Yeah, please, Ken.
Even though we're authorizing approval for the executive director, will those that exceed the $200,000 come back to the board for specific approval?
No.
Or the 4 big ones are included in that?
These are all included in this resolution. So
Okay.
they would just come back for informational
For
purposes.
informational purposes,
Correct.
once the bid is done and it's ready to go.
Correct.
Unless
All right.
there's a change to the pricing.
Unless there's a change.
Right.
And we do anticipate doing this again in 2020 for the project we're going to complete
For the
next.
balance beyond this 75 that we're talking about. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye?
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Next is awarding of a lifetime transit pass to Jerry Benson and spouse in recognition of 33 years of service to the Utah Transit Authority. Steve?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to bring this to the board. We do want to recognize Jerry for his service in the organization. Being in this role, I have a whole much greater appreciation for what people in that president CEO role went through and have to deal with. And we do recognize Jerry for his 33 years of service with the organization. And I think this is appropriate, but it does require your approval.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
No.
If seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this item.
I call for a motion to approve the awarding of a lifetime transit pass to Jerry Benson and his spouse in recognition of his 33 years of service at UTA.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Item number 11, contracts, disbursements, and grants. Our first item up, item A, is a change order for the Depot District Clean Fuels Tech Center, Design and Engineering Services with Stantec Engineering. Mary, welcome back.
Hello again.
Looks
So,
like you brought somebody with
This
you.
is Greg Tharp, the project manager for both the Depot District project and the airport project, which we'll be discussing next. So we have a contract with Stantec, and a design contract, and they did the design for the Depot District Maintenance Building, assuming that we were going to refurbish the existing building out there. Now that we are going to demolish and build a new building, we have to redesign that. So this is the contract to redesign that facility. It will cost 1.1 million, but we anticipate saving between 10 to 12 million on the by building a new building rather than repurposing the old building. The contract would still go through the end of 2021 because they'll be available during construction for design services.
Aaron, can I ask a question on it? And having lived through many years of discussion at 451 South State and the city council there, there's certainly some sensitivity and understandably toward historical elements in the building. And oddly, the historical stuff was all on the freeway side. I mean, in my mind, this stuff that sort of keeps the flavor of the era. Will the design firm try to integrate any of that? Obviously, it's not like keeping the structure, but there are design elements that you can include in a building that, are sort of modest in their, but like respect what was there and some of the, architectural elements that might be there. And you can design the ugliest building in the world was the fire station in Sugar House, and it probably didn't cost any more than a nicely designed fire station, and they've since thankfully have gotten out of that place. But you can either do it right or you can make it just just useful, but it looks ugly and doesn't contribute at all to the environment around it.
Well, we did discuss with the ship out saving some of the materials and trying to make it look like the old building, and they said, well, that's not real and that's not historic, and they did not desire that we do that. But okay. I think I'll let Greg answer if we can incorporate design elements into the new building. Are they considering that?
Yeah, what the consultant has proposed is a 3-day design charrette where everybody comes together and puts together ideas on what they want it to look like, how they want it to be configured, what the layout would be. So that has not happened yet. That's part of this contract.
Okay.
And so it's yet to be determined what the building will actually look like. That's what the design process is all about, is coming up with that new concept. So it could look like the old building or it could be different. It just depends on what comes out of the design charrette, which all of the departments deal with and are involved with. So Central Bus Garage would be involved. The Marion Here team will be involved with that. So everybody gets a chance to come in and comment. And usually they come out of the design charrette with several options. And they tend to price those before they go forward. And then from there they go with the design. I want it to be functional. I want it to be. I'm just wondering, is there a way to, after that design shred, to bring back the concepts to us before, serious money gets spent, just to have a check-in about what's being proposed. We're going to hear about it one way or the other, so I'd rather be prepared for it.
Input on that.
I just might add that we did run this past the city, that this change has taken place.
Yeah.
I really think this is the value of how UTA approaches the projects with the CMGC process, because we brought the contractor in, and they started looking at the details of this, and they were coming back to us saying, we are going to see much higher costs because of the structural requirements to try to keep that existing building. And you were basically building a building inside of the existing building. Yeah. So we caught that early enough that we can make this change now. And as Mary talked about, we can bring this back close to budget and still get us a quality building. And I think we'll encourage the city to participate with us in those charrettes. And yes, bring that back to you. Yeah, certainly Mary can invite you to participate in the charrette too.
Sure. I don't want to sort of impose that, but I'd love to participate if it works out. Beth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I read this contract, there's a couple of elements that I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to actually talk about the fact that some of the reasons that we're doing this is because of the fact that it's structurally completely unsound as a unreinforced masonry type structure. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this, which I completely understand, because I do think that making sure that we have a building that's functional during a seismic event is going to be really critical for us. And so, although I hate to see brick buildings go, I totally understand the need and the necessity for that. So I'm appreciative of that. And of course, incorporating elements I think can be done. So I'm excited to see what comes of the charrette. I have another question about, it's more like a comment, I guess, on the first one. The LEED certification is attempting to go to gold. Is that pretty typical for this type of a structure? I'm good with that. I just wanted to ask how that whole thing gets decided and worked out. Is that just the architect, or is that our input as well?
No, it's our input as well. We're pursuing gold, but we're also trying to pursue platinum. So it will just depend on how the final design comes out. Sometimes contractors, if they know it's a platinum building, will increase their prices because they know there's more involved with getting a platinum designation. So we're saying we're going for gold. We're going to try to go for platinum. But at this point, we're angling for gold, but we could achieve platinum. So we're kind of in the close range to be platinum, but we don't want to tell contractors we're going for platinum. There is a lot involved with getting a platinum or a gold LEED certification. It's not just the contractor has to keep a lot of forms. He has to submit them. They have to have an oversight from a LEED person to come in and review everything. And it's quite a process, and it's not inexpensive. So it's going to cost anywhere to $250,000 to $400,000 to get that designation. But we will go for that, yes.
The other thing I had endless discussions at the city and county building with, is it worth the actual designation, or is it just wise to design to that standard and say this is where we want to go with it?
Yeah, just for your information, there's only 2 platinum buildings in the U.S. that are certified to the new LEED certification, so this would be the 3rd.
Oh,
I think that's a discussion we'll have, though. What is that cost, and what's, the value of having the plaque on the building versus building to that criteria, that standard?
Yeah, I would love to see the building built to that standard. I scratch my head and say, is the designation worth it? I guess it is, and having a third party clarify it, but it makes me pause.
Yeah, we could still build to that standard and just not pay the money for the certification. So.
Other questions, though? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on the resolution, or on the
Change order.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the change order for the Depot District Clean Fuels Tech Center and incorporating the design and engineering services with Stantec Engineering.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
That brings us to item number B, change order for the airport station relocation construction. Mary?
Yeah, so this one is we have a contract with Kiewit for pre-construction services right now for the airport tracks relocation, and this is now for the construction portion of that work. Greg did a great job negotiating the price down with them, and so this is now within our budget, and we're ready to move forward with that work.
Please, Beth.
I just had a couple of questions. On the contract, it does have Greg's name. I know that you're sad, but you've decided to retire. Now, how does that all work? If you could kind of explain. I'm sure that's a fairly routine process to assign that to your successor, but I just wondered how that worked. And I wanted to say thank you for all of your service, too.
Thank you. Gray Turner is going to assume that role, so he's aware of that. He's been involved in a lot of the design discussions we've had with the contractor, so I think Greg can fill in adequately.
Thanks. And then I had one other question. On the contract, it has a final deadline, our construction completion date of, I think, July of 2021. And it indicates there that there's not any way to determine what cost overruns or delays could cost UTA. It says it's indeterminable, but then it did assign $1,000 a day. How does that work?
Well, we have to work with the airport, and they're getting their new airport open by September of 2020. The issues are, though, that they also have construction going on for a second terminal, second set of gates that won't open until December of 2020. And so we have to work around all of these issues they have with moving power, moving electrical lines, moving their substations, their gas services, all those things. And so the contractors, we've met with the airport quite a bit. We're actually going to meet with them Thursday again to go over the phasing of it to try and make it go as smooth as possible. But it's going to be an ongoing moving target for the contractor, trying to work with the airport because they keep adjusting things to try and get their airport open by September 2020. And we understand that. That's why we made a provisional sum for the delays. So we're trying to negotiate and get those as low as possible, the delay times, so it doesn't happen. But we have little control because they are in charge of the airport. We aren't. So we kind of serve their pleasure, if you want to look at it that way. So we'll try to keep it to a minimum. If there are delays beyond the contractor's control, then we can't exercise liquidated damages. Those would be something that nobody had foreseen. So it's a give and take issue with the contractor and with UTA. So we'll get it open as soon as we can. The contractor wants to get it open as soon as he can. So we're all playing on the same game.
So Greg,
And we're going to have a partnership meetings with the airport involved. There's partnering sessions planned. So we're going to bring everybody together in a room and try and hash out these things with the airport, with the city, with the contractor, and our contractor. So hopefully that decreases the chances of delays.
so the question, how did you come up with the $1,000 a day? How do you calculate? What's your basis for
Yeah,
calculation?
it's a typical amount we usually put in a contract. It's hard to estimate those, and it's hard to justify them. The attorneys can tell you that's a really difficult thing to justify a delay. We know it's going to cost us about $28,000 a month for busing. So that's about $1,000 a day. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Any other questions? I will say we had the pleasure of touring the airport the other day with some of the other local officials along the region, and it's really turning out to be a wonderful community asset. So I think hopefully this piece fits well, and it looks like it will be. They were good to point that out to us, and anyway, we're looking forward to it moving forward. With no other discussion, I'd entertain a motion on this change order.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we approve the change order for the airport station relocation, construction manager, and general contractor.
Second.
A motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington,
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook,
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
That brings us to our item C. Thank you, Mary and Greg, and thanks again, Greg, for your service to UTA. A change order on the front runner positive train control, construction management, and general contractor with Eddie and.
Good morning. I have Dan Hofer with me today. Dan is the manager of State of Good Repair and has been managing our positive train control project. This change order is for additional work associated with the implementation of the federally mandated positive train control system on UTA's front runner system. This change order is for $992,342 and brings the total value of the contract to $31,077,637. This change will extend the contract through December 31st, 2020, and to the completion of the positive train control project. project consists of designing, procuring necessary equipment, and constructing and installing a positive train control system that meets the requirements of the Federal Railroad Administration. Scope of this change order includes adding remote access changes to Front Runner North, various changes to the Front Runner South wiring and network systems, legacy software fixes, Front Runner South location plans, and provisional sums for equation revisions and support for Federal Railroad Administration's comments regarding UTA's safety plan submission. With that, we're open to any questions.
Eddie, obviously on positive train control, I don't know what anybody could anticipate. I mean, it's a little bit of an unknown as you enter into it. Is this just work as they've done it? Both the regulators and our contractors have said you really need to add this additional piece, or does this come after design and then you know what was required? How did you sort of get to this change order?
The way we arrived at this change order is, as you described, a lot of testing and proving out the system as it's been implemented have facilitated the need to address some of these concerns through this change order. It was like a remodel on a house, and you just kind of uncover things as you go through it. And then
that was a painful analogy.
Yeah. And then there are some elements of this that put a pin in closing out the contract. There are, for example, the human factors analysis that is a part of this that is required. Because of the nature of our PTC system, the way it was described in the regulation, we needed further guidance because that was more directed towards a different type of PTC system. And this human factors analysis is more geared based on federal guidelines to our type of PTC system. So now that we have a clear roadmap on that, this is the inclusion of that piece as well.
Okay. Questions? Please, Beth.
I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. I know contractually there's a seismic component to this. Is that a federal or a state that makes that, who establishes those guidelines?
If I understand.
At least that's what it says in the contract.
Push it and let it go.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's all right. You're good at it.
Thanks. This requirement pushes it out to the federal deadline for when PTC is required to be installed. Depending on when our safety plan gets approved, we could move then to close out the contract and to an earlier date. But this just puts it out at the end, just in case we had to go that far.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? If there aren't any, I would entertain a motion on this change order.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the change order for the Front Runner Positive Train Control Construction Management and General Contractor with Rocky Mountain Systems Services.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington?
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook?
Aye.
Chair Christensen?
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks. Eddie, you have a pre-procurement item before
I
us.
do. This pre-procurement is a 5-year contract, be a multiple vendor contract on an as-needed basis to provide collision and auto body repair for our rideshare and van pool vehicles, as well as FLHQ white fleet vehicles and any third-party claim type vehicles, since we're self-insured. This contract will help ensure best price repairs for vehicles that have been in accidents or in need of auto body repairs. Estimated contract amount reflects an estimate based on the last 5 years of actual auto body repairs. And the estimated value of this 5-year contract somewhere in the neighborhood of $520,000.
And Eddie, does it go to multiple contractors, or do you basically get a single chain of auto?
I think it'll be multiple contractors. Obviously, it'll go out for bid, and I think we'll see multiple contractors in different areas. So similar to you've seen with our preventative maintenance contracts with van pool, they're all over the place,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of times it's easiest to take those vans, close to where they're located, where they originate.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Thanks for the heads up. Item number 12 is an important item for UTA. It's our independent monitor report, and we would welcome forward Reese Morgan and Sean Coyle. And with, let's see if I'll say it and then you can correct me, Koblenz, Patch, Duffy, and Bass.
Excellent.
But they're here on behalf of the Department of Justice and on their contract with UTA to assure our compliance with our non-prosecutorial agreement. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, thanks.
Thank you very much. Trustee Holbrook, Trustee Millington, Chair Christensen, thank you for having us today. We appreciate the opportunity to share at a high level some of our findings from our initial report, as well as talk about what our plan is for phase 2 of the monitorship, now that with the initial report being completed, phase 1 is completed. The first thing I want to talk about is what the monitorship's focus was. As you know, and as you just said, Chair Christensen, the monitorship came about because of a non-prosecution agreement entered into in 2017 between UTA and the U.S. Attorney's Office for Utah. The non-prosecution agreement, therefore...
Just a little bit closer.
All right.
Yeah, there we
How's
go.
this better?
That's better. Thank
Okay.
you.
Therefore, we see the non-prosecution agreement as the basis for our work. It sets out our guidelines and establishes really our charter. There are 4 core concerns that were raised by the U.S. Attorney's Office that the monitorship is supposed to monitor and address. Those 4 core issues are inadequate controls over federal funds and drawdowns from federal grants, improper handling and disclosure of property acquisitions and disposition, non-compliance with ethical standards resulting in benefits to UTA employees and board members, and improper approval of executive bonuses. In addition to these 4 core issues, our view is also guiding the monitorship is an October 2016 letter from outside counsel for UTA to the U.S. Attorney's Office that outlined 12 key reforms that the authority had put in place in order to try and address the 4 core issues. I'm not going to read all 12. I'm not going to address all 12 this morning. I will talk about a few of those reforms that became a focus of our initial report. So the other thing I wanted to talk about as a general introduction is our process during phase 1. As you all know, we put in a significant amount of work. We conducted interviews of 28 individuals. Those individuals included present and former employees of UTA. They also included members of the U.S. Attorney's Office, agents from the FBI and the U.S. Department of Transportation who had conducted the investigation that led to the non-prosecution agreement. And then the Utah Legislative Auditor, as well as several members of his staff. As you know, in some ways, the U.S. Attorney's Office's investigation began because of a legislative audit in 2014 by the Utah Legislative Auditor. We felt it was important to talk to them as well. We received from several sources, roughly 14,000 pages worth of documentation that we reviewed. The sources would include UTA, of course. The vast majority came from the authority itself, but also from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the FBI, from the U.S. Department of Transportation. We also, of course, reviewed the legislative audits that kind of began this process. We also retained transportation auditor consultants, particularly to help with the very specific requirements and compliance issues related to federal grant management. The purpose of phase 1, which ended with our initial report, was to assess the current status of the 2016 reforms. I'm going to refer to the 12 reforms that were in outside counsel for UTA's letter in 2016 as the 2016 reforms. And so the purpose of phase 1 was for us to assess how those are going, their effectiveness, and what we think could, at this stage, be done better. I should have mentioned, I'm going to talk about the initial report and what we did in phase 1. Mr. Coyle is going to discuss what our plan is for phase 2. So turning to the results of our phase 1 monitorship and the initial report. before I get to some of our specific findings and get a little critical, I want to talk about a few positives. First, we were very impressed with the current UTA personnel that we met. We found them very impressive, and that they all seem to care very much about establishing ethical management of the authority. That was encouraging. Also, as we noted throughout our report, we believe progress has been made through the reforms and through other reforms put in place since then. It's not that there's not more work that can be done, but we believe progress has been made in implementing controls and procedures that will try to address those four core issues and prevent a recurrence of some of the problems cited by both the Utah Legislative Auditor and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the past. Finally, we also appreciate, and I believe it was very strong cooperation from UTA as we did our monitorship. Obviously, probably not the most welcoming thing to have outside people come in and stand over your shoulder, but we appreciate the cooperation that we received from UTA and from its outside counsel. It was very helpful. So this all helped to ameliorate one of our chief concerns, which is that many of the 2016 reforms either no longer exist or have been overtaken by events. Some of those outside of the control of UTA. We'll talk about SB 136 in a moment. The concern, and I'm going to address a few of these particular reforms, but the concern is that the non-prosecution agreement was premised in part on these 12 reforms. And the fact that a number of those reforms no longer exist, obviously, is something that we need to examine. So I'll talk about just a few of those. First and foremost, in the October 2016 letter outlining the reforms was leadership changes. It was touted as one of the primary reforms to try and address some of the issues that had arisen in the past. And there's no question that change in leadership was necessary. The concern that we saw, and I should say, when I say that these are concerns, we're not necessarily saying that something is wrong. In fact, I'm not sure that there is anything wrong. It's just some concerns that we'll be monitoring during phase 2. It may be that all these changes that have happened, all the reforms that have been kind of outpaced by events like SB 136, there's no problem with that. So I want to make that clear. So on leadership changes, the issue we've seen is there's been a nearly total turnover in leadership at UTA since the reform was discussed in October 2016. The reform cited specific leaders that were outgoing and specific leaders that were incoming, and cited those specific leaders that were incoming as key reforms, folks that were going to change the way UTA had been doing business, at least with respect to some of the concerns raised in the past. Nearly all those, I'll call them reformers, have since left. And in fact, there's been a multiple turnover at a number of positions. Just to note a few, the board chair, there were 4 chairs of the board in a little bit more than 3 years. That's significant turnover for such a high-stakes leadership position. As Mr. Meyer knows, for the CEO or the executive director, the chief executive of the agency, Mr. Benson was cited as a reformer, replacing Mr. Allegra. Mr. Benson was, I think his title was executive director. He was here for less than 2 years. Mr. Meyer stepped in to fill that breach, and now he is going to be leaving. Again, it's not necessarily that there's a problem, but it is concerning that there's such a cycle of turnover at some of the highest leadership positions in the authority. Stability for an authority like this, an agency like this, is important. General counsel was another position that was cited extensively in the October 2016 letter as a reform. Issues with the prior general counsel had been a direct focus of both the Utah Legislative Auditor as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office. And obviously, general counsel is an important position, particularly for the 4 core issues that we are supposed to monitor, because it focuses on compliance in a variety of ways, but particularly with federal grant management. And the general counselor, Mr. Blakesley, who was incoming and cited in this letter, was touted as a reformer, but also with particular expertise in terms of compliance with federal transit rules and procedures. Mr. Blakesley lasted about 3 years before he was removed via SB 136. So again, another key position where there's been significant turnover, and where one of the reforms that was highlighted in 2016, Mr. Blakesley and what he was going to bring to the office no longer exists. Another reform that was cited, the second most important, I'd say, in the letter of October 2016 was organizational changes. And there were, I think there were lots of good ideas in there. One in particular was to split the transit-oriented development oversight and management out of the general counsel's office, where both oversight and management had been put in, the charge of the general counsel. So, there were, I think in the letter there are a number of good organizational changes outlined. But then SB 136 came about, and it revamped the organization extensively, eliminating many of the organizational changes that have been touted before as reforms. Again, I want to make it clear that we're not saying that SB 136 has had a negative impact on the authority, but it did change what had been laid out and touted as reforms. So a couple of specific issues with respect to SB 136 that came up repeatedly during our Phase 1 process. The local advisory council was a significant topic of conversation. And there were two main issues that we discussed in our report, and I'll share with you about the local advisory council. The first is it became very clear very early on that there is no consensus among current UTA personnel, or even among some of the highest levels of leadership, both with respect to the board and with respect to the local advisory council, as to what exactly their authority is. I think to some extent, having read SB 136, this is because the language is not very precise. But in particular, it's very unclear what their authority is for three very large parts of what UTA does: transit-oriented development, capital projects, and station area plans. And the issue is, you could ask 5 folks to be candid whether they had up or down authority over transit-oriented development projects, and you might get 5 different answers. Are they advisory? Do they have up or down authority? And the same was true for capital projects and station area plans. Our expectation is that this will get resolved, and UTA, perhaps with our help, will figure out what sort of authority they have over those 3 major areas. But during our interviews, it was clear that there is not a consensus as to how far their authority, what the scope of their authority is. The other major concern I'll note about the local advisory council is its similarity to the structure of the prior board. One of the concerns raised and an organizational change that was discussed was that the prior board was, I believe, had 16 members, part-time. It was unwieldy, and there were many concerns were raised with us over our interviews that, given the part-time nature and size of it, it could be subject to excessive control by a strong personality. I believe SB 136, my view is one purpose was to create this 3-person board of trustees to try and address that. But then it also created a local advisory council with unclear authority and a structure somewhat similar to the prior 16-member board. Again, we're not sure at this stage whether that is actually a problem, but it's something that we'll be reviewing over Phase 2. We also recognize, and we talked about it in our report, that it's a tricky issue because UTA is meant to provide regional transportation, but it also services the local communities. And there needs to be a balance between addressing regional transportation needs, but also serving and considering the issues raised by the localities that make up that region. So we recognize that this is a tricky situation, and again, it's something we'll be monitoring going forward. SB 136 also eliminated the general counsel's office. the concerns with that is, as I discussed first, one of the primary reforms cited in terms of leadership changes was bringing in Mr. Blakesley, who had transit experience and was presented as a reformer. There have been concerns raised that SB 136 targeted Mr. Blakesley as an individual because he was a reformer. We've heard the opposite as well. We don't know who's right or who's wrong on that. But it was a concern raised by a number of folks as we went through our process. Putting aside Mr. Blakesley in particular, we have some concern with getting rid of an office that had 5, 6 experienced attorneys on staff, none of whom have elected to stay on with the transition over to the Attorney General's office. Losing that expertise, that institutional knowledge, could be an issue. Again, we're not saying it is, but it's something we'll be looking at as we go forward. We also recognize that there could be an increase in efficiency with the assistant attorney generals who are now serving UTA. Again, we'll just be monitoring that going forward. And I would say that having now met and discussed a number of issues with those assistant attorneys general, we're impressed and hopeful that while we're going to look at this as a potential issue, it is not going to actually be a problem. It was clear that as of 2013, 2014, the audit function in UTA was not really functioning. It looks like audit is much more robust than it was then. So this is definitely a shining light in terms of some progress that has been made. One concern we had is that our understanding is organizations of this size often have both an audit function and a separate risk management function. And there's not really a risk management function at UTA that's at least firmly established or well outlined. The difference is audit is a looking back. You do an audit to see how the processes and procedures have worked over the past year or whatever the time frame is. Risk management looks forward and tries to predict issues. One of our recommendations is that the UTA consider whether it would be appropriate to create a formal risk management function. In terms of federal grant management, which I think is going to be the last reform I'll talk about, we do believe federal grant compliance has improved. It looks like at the time of the legislative audit in 2014, grant management was not functioning very well at UTA. We think that's improved, and there appear to be very good processes in place. We have some concerns that our transportation audit consultants have raised that we outlined in our report regarding trying to make sure that you are assessing the cycles that are applicable to grant management so that you stay in compliance. But generally, these are not ethical concerns, but rather compliance concerns that we'll continue to monitor going forward. Also in the letter, there was a reference to a grants management group. This again is in the 2016 letter, touted as a reform. The grants management group, it doesn't appear to us to be very formal. A good idea, but it doesn't look like it's been formalized or has very much in the way of process around it. We'll be looking at that going forward and discussing whether that's something that should be more formalized by UTA. As you know, it's a 50-page report with a lot of observations. I don't want to take up too much time. I already have taken up more than I intended. That's some of the highlights out of our initial report and what we did in phase 1. I'm going to turn it over now to Sean to talk about the plan going forward for phase 2.
So as Reese just outlined, the point of phase 1, particularly given the substantial changes that had occurred from the time of the non-prosecution agreement until our engagement, really phase 1 was directed towards assessing what issues were present rather than reaching final judgments about them. Phase 2 is more the space where we will try to test those issues, reach recommendations where we think they're appropriate, rule out issues that maybe aren't a concern after all, as Reese just said. So here's a very high-level overview of how we intend to accomplish that. So phase 2 will consist of 4 reports, roughly every 6 months. The first of those should come out by the end of 2019. We're going to spread the phase 1 issues over those 4 reports. So in other words, we're not in each report going to focus on every issue that was raised in phase 1, because that would just give us not enough depth on each issue. Instead, we'll group them, focus on them in turn, in groups, in each reporting period. And what we've done is kind of categorize them. So you have one category, for example, of kind of organizational and structural issues. Another would be compliance and ethics issues. And then the last category is kind of a catch-all of more routine policy and procedure issues. We've also looked at these various issues in terms of complexity and group them accordingly so that we don't end up overloading any one reporting period with too much complexity. Again, the goal here is to give enough room for each reporting period to dive sufficiently deeply into the issues, and also organize them and stage them so that we try to get into some of the more complex issues early without overloading the early reporting periods, just in case those have to be revisited in a later reporting period. The tentative plan for the first report in phase 2 is to focus on that transition from the in-house general counsel's office to the reliance on the legal team from the AG's office. We also would like to look at the implementation of the new TOD procedures that have arisen from the issues spotted during the U.S. Attorney's investigation. Those are both fairly complex, and again, part of the reason for that is it might make sense to test those early in phase 2 and also see how they're doing later on in phase 2. And then I'd also like to, in phase 2, take a look at some of the travel documentation issues that are more discrete, and I think we can sort of get out of the way in the first part of phase 2. It seems like there's been a lot of progress made on that, and we have, fairly positive views of how those procedures have been put in place. I anticipate we might be able to kind of get through that and eliminate it early in phase 2. Some of the bigger items that we are going to leave toward later in phase 2 are issues that we think need some time to develop. So, Reese has highlighted, the turnover in leadership and the role of the LAC and the understanding of UTA personnel of that role. It seems like it makes sense to let those things develop and mature a little bit. There has been recently good stability among the leadership, and obviously there's the new Board of Trustees structure in place. We'd like to see how those things play out over time. There was a tumultuous period there for a little bit where there was quite a lot of turnover in a short period of time. That may turn out to be a blip, so it doesn't make sense to dive right into that now. And then on the LAC role, it's so new. It's frankly not that surprising that there would be differing views on the LAC's role, given how new it is, given how new SB 136 was. So it seems like it makes sense to let that mature a little bit and see how perspectives have changed later in phase 2. And finally, I'll just highlight 2 long-term projects that we'd like to get started on earlier in phase 2, but might kind of run throughout the phase. Those are, one, we'd like to see as much of a TOD life cycle as we can. Obviously, those tend to be long-term projects, and frankly, the length of the monitorship might not be long enough to look at an entire TOD cycle, even if we, sort of cherry-picked various projects. And there has been a bit of a reset, obviously, in the TOD program. So, there may not be enough of that sort of work happening for us to see. We'd like to see as much as we can, so we're going to work with the TOD folks to see where it makes sense to plug in on that. And then with the internal audit function, we'd like to see one audit kind of soup to nuts. So we'd like to talk to them about, which audit makes sense to kind of embed in and, where in phase 2 that should come. So we'll talk to them about kind of what their 3-year plan is for that, a 2-year plan is for that, and see if we can find one internal audit that we think makes sense for us to get, really closely, or for us to really closely monitor to get a sense of how those work. So that's an overview of how we expect phase 2 to go. And as I said, our first report should come, around the end of the year. And we're looking forward to continuing to work with the folks here at UTA who, as Ree said, everybody's been wonderful and really helpful and cooperative. So thank you all for your time and for all that help and cooperation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for that, excuse me, that presentation. Let me go to board members if you have questions or things. I would just say, we certainly look forward to continuing that cooperation and taking whatever constructive feedback you want to offer, and we're resound in completing our obligations associated with the agreement with DOJ. And so, I think as a board, we'll continue to work to that end. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great. We're going to just take a minute and take a recess, and I show it's roughly about 10:10, so about 10:20 we'll reassemble. We welcome, we're back from our recess, and a few of us are still eating a few Rice Krispie squares to celebrate Mr. Meyer's last meeting and his favorite treat. We're up to an important discussion on service choices and coverage scenarios, and we had a great presentation by our consultant a few weeks ago, and it led to some conversations about how you might do coverage, and I thought we felt like it would be very helpful for staff to come back and talk about what that could look like and in various scenarios. And so, Laura, I understand, Alex, we're glad to have you both here. So, please.
Thank you so much. I will try to not speak at hummingbird speed after eating all of that sugar, but I do that sometimes. So just tell me to slow down if I need to. So we are back to talk primarily about coverage service today. As you mentioned in your introduction, I think we've talked a lot about what ridership service looks like, and it's pretty easy to know, okay, if we want to focus on ridership, we know exactly what we do. We have a bus that comes frequently, it runs early in the morning, late at night. The coverage is a little squishier. And so I think this is a great opportunity to come back and talk to you more about that. A reminder of the question at hand here, we are trying to strike the right balance between ridership and coverage in our bus network design. We're looking at both our current resources, should we redistribute and reallocate our current resources in one direction or another, and what should we do with future resources as they become available? So that's kind of what we're trying to solve. So coverage. Service is typically operated in areas that have this coverage service in low density, so that's density of both people or density of jobs, low levels of walkability, so primarily suburban style street networks that are less connected, fewer intersections, so people have a longer distance to get to and from places, destinations that are isolated from one another. So as we're growing in other parts of the valley, sometimes there's a library, and then 2 miles down the road, there's a rec center, and then, a little ways down the road, there's a community college, and they're not as tightly grouped together as you might see in a downtown urban core. And oftentimes they're spread across long distances. Because our transit service needs to operate in an area where they have longer distances to travel in order to collect and pick up riders, it becomes much more expensive service for us to operate. So the expectation here is that we're talking about access more so than ridership. So why on earth would we want to provide coverage service if not a lot of people are going to ride and it's expensive and it isn't as functional? Well, there's a variety of reasons. One is we are growing as a region, particularly in the southwest part of Salt Lake County. Northern Utah County is just booming. We know that a lot of people are coming. Our population's scheduled to double by 2050. That's a lot of new people, and the majority of that growth is happening in areas. So we know that there's going to be an increasing need in those areas. And a lot of areas that really have land use patterns that it is just not effective to serve them with fixed route, traditional 40-foot bus transit. It's just ineffective, but there are still needs in those areas. So we really hear three primary arguments for coverage service. One is serving people that have no alternative. So this could be people with who are seniors, low-income populations, those with disabilities, unable to drive. I think it's really important to clarify here that ridership service serves these people as well. So we are talking about the people with needs in coverage areas only. We are already serving the needs of people with no alternative with ridership service as well.
And as we have seen, as cities and downtowns across the country, and Salt Lake and this region is no exception, downtowns become more popular and become more expensive, the lower income people are moving out to farther out of the city centers and into areas that are harder to reach, so that becomes a challenge for us. So.
Thanks, Alex. Another reason is responding to new development. We have a lot of communities that are growing, and new schools are popping up, new employment centers are popping up. They may not have the ridership demand service today, but they're growing in that area. So Daybreak's a good example of this. It started out kind of in the middle of nowhere. All of a sudden, it's a downtown area with all kinds of jobs and a lot of people, and Now it can support a more transit or ridership-focused service. And then the third reason is providing some service to all taxing areas. We are a public entity. We collect public taxes from everyone within our service area. And so it's reasonable to expect that everybody should receive some sort of service in exchange for that. This spreads our coverage the very thinnest by spreading it out across everyone. So one key thing to think about is how would we measure the success of coverage service? I think a lot of the criticisms that we hear as a transit agency are, oh, I saw an empty bus driving by, what a waste of public tax dollars. It's really important for you to be able to respond to those critiques and say, no, it's not, because that's not the job that this particular bus service is providing. We've asked this bus to provide coverage service. It's about access, it's about covering a larger geographic area. It's not about ridership, so that's not the right metric for this. It's really about access. That said, we still need to have somebody riding it, or else it wouldn't make sense at all, right? So we still evaluate ridership, but it's not the primary metric for this. It's much more about access.
And then part of that is the education piece for our communities and leaders throughout the region. So that they are aware that if they ask for coverage type service, they need to be aware that that's going to often mean vehicles with not many people in it because of the land use patterns.
Another critique also is, well, why don't you provide a smaller bus? Drive a smaller bus if there's not as many people riding. And the vast majority of our expenses is in the operator. You have to pay an operator the same whether they're driving a big bus or a small bus. And so having the capacity and the availability for more people to ride is actually a better choice for us.
And depending on the situation, having a variety of sizes of buses can actually increase our cost because that requires rotation, and there's certain times where you'd have to switch out from a smaller to a larger bus. So
limits our ability to interline and all of those things. So we have a variety of tools that are available to us to provide coverage service. We have flex routes. We are implementing a microtransit pilot here in just a short while in the southwestern part of Salt Lake County. We have our standard fixed route bus, and we have express or rush hour service. It's important to know that we have a limited budget. None of these solutions make the pie bigger. We are simply saying, how should we use the slice of pie that we're using for coverage service? If you want double the service, you need double the budget. So we'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. So a flex route, we have these in a lot of areas right now. They sort of meander through low density areas. They do a lot of deviations to pick up the rec center and the library and the community college and the schools. And they sort of meander through a community. They also allow you to deviate off the route by calling in advance, and it will actually take you to a place just a little bit outside of the fixed route itself, but you do have to schedule that. That's a great service. It's nice for us, and it worked really well when we first implemented this because it allows us to cover both our paratransit obligations and provide some fixed route traditional transit service as well. Limitations, it's a long, slow trip. The deviations can cause delays for other riders, and you have to schedule in advance, so it takes a little bit of planning and forethought. We have places where our flex routes are meeting our performance standards and they're doing really well, and we have places where maybe they're not meeting, we're not getting quite as many riders as we'd like to see. And in those areas, we might want to look at something like microtransit, and that's exactly what we did in southern Salt Lake County. We looked at our flex routes. Those that were not meeting our standard performance thresholds were that's how we drew the boundaries of the microtransit pilot. So in this area, the advantage here is that it covers the largest possible area you can imagine. Every corner of this fictitious city here is covered by this microtransit pilot. So everyone's needs are met. It's on demand, so it can be convenient. It can take you right where you want to go without having to walk. It minimizes walking. That's a helpful thing. But it's important to know that this is a pilot. We have not tested it yet. We don't know that it's a silver bullet. And the other key thing here is it's expensive per ride. It's very expensive per ride. And so if we have a lot of people taking us up on this and we see, just so much use, that would indicate that we could support a fixed route transit service at a much more economical price for UTA. So it's something we want to think about. Another thing is they're all single or in a lot of cases, single occupancy vehicles. So it creates more congestion, more air quality, unless you're getting a lot of people on those vans at once, which is our hope. But there could be a chance where it's just a single rider.
And our expectation based on looking at other agencies around the country that have piloted, it's very, very low ridership per hour, which is our standard measure of productivity of how efficient our service is. It's very inefficient compared to any other service we would offer.
But it covers the largest geographic area. So it's an opportunity.
Is that productivity even true with maybe those existing flex routes that you were referring to?
So we look at our flex routes. We have some that meet a certain, I think the threshold is 5 passengers per hour. We have some that are meeting that and above. And then we have some that are we're not even getting 5 people per hour on some of the flex routes. And that's in the areas where we're trying this microtransit pilot to see.
And even 5 is very low. Many agencies don't run any service in an area that could only support 5 per hour. So.
Another option for us is to take those same resources and instead of trying to do flex routes or a microtransit area is to have a single fixed route bus. The disadvantages here is it only covers really that main corridor, right? Other people need to somehow still get to the bus route. It's not going to be great service. It will probably not start super early in the morning, won't run super late at night. Maybe it's 30-minute frequency. So it's not quite as useful, but those same resources could go towards one key corridor. A place where we might want to use this is if we have a community that's really trying to, a lot of economic development is happening in a single corridor, and we want to help be a partner in stimulating that. That might be an opportunity where we want to try one of those, or these solutions. And the last is express or rush hour only service. Again, it serves just a limited area and only limited hours. And it focuses really more on commuter services as opposed to something like this, which may be more intra-community service. This is inter-community service. So we're taking people out of their neighborhood and taking them somewhere else. So those were a variety of different options that we have. Again, it's important to know that none of these tools expand the pie or make it bigger. We're trading the same dollars for the same dollars in different tools. I think our performance standards help us choose and guide which is the right solution for these various different areas. And this microtransit pilot, I think, will be a good opportunity for us to learn what we can expect to see from that. Is it going to be effective? Do we have a lot of people riding it? If people come out of the woodwork and there's this latent demand for transit that we hear about all the time, maybe we'll say, you know what, we really think a fixed route service is going to be better for you, and we might transition towards that over time. The other thing I think to think about is that all of our transit service exists on sort of a spectrum of transect. So we can start with kind of transit on training wheels, and as the communities grow and develop and become more dense and we have more ridership, you can transition up. And so we're thinking always about, okay, where are we today? Where are we headed in the future? Reevaluating that and determining every year if we need to change things to better match.
And then, of course, a big part of that is the land use picture. So if the development changes to support a higher level of transit, we can be there to look at it. So.
Exactly. Does that help answer some of your questions? And what do you have remaining that we can research further for you?
Thank you. I had one question I wanted to understand, because when you just talked about the flex routes and the calling ahead and the length of time that is required on that, can you articulate to me how they adhere to a schedule if that's the case? If they had about 5 people, I guess, that all said, hey, could you come over here? Hey, could you come over here?
Right.
How would that work, and how would that compare with a microtransit?
So when somebody is scheduling a deviation on a flex route, they call our customer service line, and we have a dispatcher that will do that. And if they have too many deviations all at once that just would totally blow the schedule, they'll say, I'm sorry, we can't do it at that time, but we could at this time here. So it's fairly manual. They self-regulate that. The same will happen with the microtransit pilot. Is they will have a time limit, and say, okay, within 15 minutes we can do these 3 things. If we add a couple more, it will adjust our schedule, and we'll have to pick them up on a different trip or with a different vehicle.
But both of those services do have what could be a disadvantage to someone considering using the service. That it could have a variable travel time depending on how many deviations or how many other people are being picked up if it's microtransit.
You have to be a little bit flexible.
And just to clarify, so the microtransit is it's designed to be app-based primarily. So you're taking out that individual person of customer service that would make that communication. So is that app designed to, in essence, communicate that? Or how does that?
Well, it's important to note that people can also still make a phone call, because not everyone has a smartphone, right? And so we want the service to be accessible to anyone. So they could still make a phone call to have somebody schedule them that way as well. But I think that the app, and I'm not, this is brand new for us. I haven't seen it in action yet. And Jaron is really the expert. My sense is that the app will give you an estimated travel time and say, we think will get you to your destination by
Maybe
this
a
time.
range of time.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That's helpful.
So Laura, what do you recommend we do?
I'm going to give you the perfect political answer is it depends. I think it really depends on the area. It depends on what problem we're trying to solve.
What do you
what
recommend
the
we
desires
do?
are. I think, are you asking in terms of which coverage tool is the best, or on the ridership coverage balance? as a
Ridership
whole?
coverage.
This is a really tricky thing, and I know that you're really looking to us to give you a recommendation on that. And I want to go back to, you're a cat person or you're a dog person. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really it depends on our values and what we're trying to do. I think at our community leader workshops, which were largely populated and attended by city planners, public works staff, that group tended towards a greater emphasis on ridership.
Yep.
But that said, you operate in a political world, and you have a lot of constituents and folks that you need to represent that would be left out if we focused on just ridership. And so I think it needs to be a balance, and it really is a leadership opportunity for you all to determine where to fall
We're
in that
currently at
spectrum.
about 60-40, at least in Salt Lake and South, and just the opposite, 40-60 in the North. Do you see us going to a 70-30, which is the public officials seem to indicate a 70-30 balance is they would be comfortable with that?
I think we have a lot of opportunity within the urban core. I think focusing more on ridership would give us a great example to point to and say, look what we could do if we put the right resources towards transit. I think that's a really unique opportunity that if you were to put more transit or more focus on ridership, we could show what is possible with a really well-funded transit system. I think it could be a tool to help incentivize communities that are maybe developing in a less transit-friendly way to start developing in a more transit-friendly development pattern if they're seeing that UTA's focus is more on ridership. That said, there are a lot of communities that I know really desperately want transit service, and they're afraid that they will be left behind if they don't get something now. And as their communities are growing and their young populations, those are easy people to transition onto transit because they're a little bit more adventuresome, right? And as those communities age, there's a concern that perhaps we'll lose that opportunity to build a populace of transit riders and transit advocates.
Is there a possibility that we, I know that this puts the burden back on us for scheduling, but is there a possibility that if our coverage reach into the less populated areas could bring people to a central point where the ridership is provided so that there's one, maybe two transitions in their journey? Is that a possibility? Is that something that we...
Well, that's exactly what our rail system does, essentially, right? It connects everybody in the whole region at a really high level of service. And so Right now, we have brought a lot of people to the train system and said, okay, our job is to just get you to our trunk line and go on. But one thing that we have noticed is that if you live here and you want to go here, and the train's in the middle, transfer is less convenient than going straight across and transferring once and going up.
Right.
So it's a balance between how much do we focus our bus system on just bringing people to the train, and how much do we facilitate just east-west travel within the bus service itself. And we hear that over and over again. That's where I think one of these opportunities here exist, where we may say, you know what, you've got to get yourself to the bus system, but you're going to have a reliable transit system that crosses the entire valley. You can connect to the train if you'd like to connect to the train, or you can connect to another bus route that's fairly frequent further east or west, depending on where you're going. But we are asking people to get to the bus line.
Right.
So, yeah, it's hard. I can give you my personal opinion, but my personal opinion is going to be different than Alex's personal opinion. And if you ask our finance folks versus our civil rights folks, you will get wildly different answers.
But your personal opinion is colored by significant knowledge and experience.
As is everybody else in the agencies, really. You know, I know I'm being dodgy here. I apologize for that. But you know, I think there are lots of different ways to do this right. I really do. I think many transit agencies lean towards ridership because ridership generates fare revenue, and we're often evaluated based on ridership.
Ridership is often the most obvious barometer of success for a transit agency, and is the most, in many cases, gets big headlines. And as we've discussed before, in other agencies, this process has been initiated as part of some sort of impetus, whether it was from media coverage or someone, a board or senior leadership saying that we're failing in ridership. The good news we have is that, you know, we have not seen a great concern that we're doing terribly in ridership or anything of that sort. So, and it is, I mean, in Laura's defense, it is really about what outcomes you would like to see for the agency. And ridership can do one thing and coverage can do another thing. And we can't decide that on a technical level based on our knowledge. We can tell you what each will do. We can tell you how we feel about it. But
our technical
they just do
expertise
different
comes
things.
in after you tell us what your values are, then we'll give you the best
Right.
technical response.
And
to it.
So
obviously,
that you will know,
responses.
this was a major topic at a conference the three of us attended a couple of weeks ago, a national conference of transit board members, and ridership was a very significant portion of the discussion. So everybody's grappling with this same issue that we're trying to figure out here.
You know, and I have to credit you all. This is sort of the existential question that every transit agency wrestles with, and it's hard. And that's why so many people avoid directly asking and answering the question. But what it will do once you answer the question, once you answer it, it gives us a policy that we can fall back on and says, you know what, we had an extensive public engagement process. We solicited feedback from so many different community leaders, our staff, consultants that have done this around the world, and we've decided to land here. And when a community calls and says, hey, why don't we have transit service in our area, we can say, well, right now, this is our focus. This is where we are, and we can't do more in this area right now because this is where we've decided based on all of this input. So I think it will make all of our jobs a lot easier once we make that decision. Making the decision itself, I know, is challenging. One thing that I know we're going a little long here, I just want to end on, our consultant mentioned that of all of the communities that he's worked with, our community feedback on this question has been the most conservative and moderate than any community he's worked with. And I think that's a compliment to UTA and to our amazing service planning staff that has done all the work that they have to really get the service where it needs to be and serving the community in the way that it needs to. So I think you would be very safe and you could feel really confident in a decision if you just followed the community's responses and feedback on this, which is keep things roughly as they are and make very modest changes if you can make any changes. Because I think people have told us that we feel like it's about right.
I just wanted to have a quick comment. In the last 2 days, I've been in Davis, Weber, and Box Elder counties, respectively. And the dialogue, as Kent mentioned, my neck of the woods, if you will, is 40% ridership, 60% coverage. And my dialogue with Box Elder commissioners and those mayors up there was, you know, how do we kind of help you have that balance, that policy discussion, and still serve your communities? And they actually totally understood that. And it changed a lot of the way that they were thinking about how we were thinking. And it was quite positive. They were saying, well, we already know that we have, in this case, Box Elder, we already know that we have 11th South. And that's a major, right now it's a major access to I-15. So, and I said, so you know where your density could be in the future. And that made them think, so we need to start looking at our land use. And that, I think, is where this dialogue has been really, really successful. I was at Weber County Commissioners, and Mayor Call did a presentation on this very topic and had wildly divergent input. Roy City said, should all be ridership, 100%, because we're all built out. Other communities, I like the 40-60. So it's a great dialogue, though, for everyone to have, because it took everyone's education level up to here as to why these decisions are being made and how their policies can really impact what they're looking to do in the future. And then I was at Farmington City last night, who has a trolley, a front runner station, you know, bus service, and they were like, well, we totally understand it, and we want to do more too. So anyway, I just wanted to say that having this dialogue has been incredibly valuable, and I think it does speak to what the input is from a lot of our respective regions. So thank you.
Laura, one question I have for you a little bit is, and I was just thinking about this a little, you know, if somehow you kept your current funding scenarios somewhat similar, maybe with some tweaking, and I think somehow we have to think about how our future planning mirrors the outcomes of each municipality's work on HB 34 and where they pick their transit corridors to be. You know, I was thinking back in the context of a meeting you and I had attended with a mayor out in the southwest part of Salt Lake County who, you know, had pointed it, and I can't even remember the corridor. I think I know, but I'm, you know, for fear of getting it wrong, I won't say it. But they talked about how, and it had the potential of connecting through from 2 points of our system, but that would most likely be their density corridor. If our fixed route system, you know, mirrored that at, you know, 30-minute frequencies or something that would give them some confidence of connection, and then, you know, just acknowledge that the rest of their city would probably be better served by a microtransit solution that either moved them within the geocode zone or you know, somehow also connected them onto our system. And I don't know how the dollars work out, but it strikes me in that scenario, and I think that would mirror in a lot of cases. And it probably falls under a coverage scenario, but yet you have the potential of a developing frequency corridor, you know, a better balance, I guess I should say, rather than sort of this this route that meanders through a community that's not very effective.
Yeah. If I may, I think
Please.
this is what they have right now, a flex route and sort of meandering system. And if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting something along the lines of a combination of this, and this. I want to point out that, again, we're talking about the same dollars. So to do both, that's double the cost. However, if we're talking about future resources, there's an opportunity to do that, right? So maybe we could take our current resources and consolidate the flex routes into the microtransit pilot. And then with future dollars, you add a fixed route service on top of it.
Well, and that's
Remember that it's more money to do both.
and since Kent threw it out there, I'll just say I'll mirror Kent's idea of a 70-30 scenario, that and so your new dollars would go toward I won't blame you entirely, Kent, but a higher frequency route within some of those corridors that says, look, we're going to go to this marriage together, and you've told us this is your high frequency transit corridor, so this is where we're going to put that high frequency transit. And I think it gives some teeth to the work that they're doing in HB 34. It also, I think, hits the legislative, mandate, or the strong encouragement that, you tell us where, and if you don't, then you shouldn't get additional transportation dollars. And I think somehow we have to think about it in that context. And then the other part of that, I would love to see in Salt Lake County in particular, that east-west movement is difficult. And we sort of, in a way, have made an artificial barrier with our transit, our rail lines, in the sense that they end there and you have to somehow go on, when a lot of that movement is really going through that corridor. And if we can figure out a quicker transition to get off, and then, and maybe actually, as we look to deploy, places where our operators are changing over, have little micro transit transition centers, through the thing, so that you can go there knowing you can pick up 4 different bus lines, or, that get you, so you're looking at a one transfer scenario.
We've been thinking exactly the same thing. A lot of our end-of-line layover facilities are right along that trunk line, and moving them out to the edges allows the bus to travel all the way through, and somebody not have to just stop at the rail line if they want to keep going.
So I'm getting there, and I know we've given the advisory council some time to come back with some feedback, but, the more I listen to it, if we're not going to get to a higher ridership system with new dollars, I don't want to leave somebody entirely behind, but I think we have to sort of rethink how that coverage takes place, I guess.
Well, in looking at moving to a higher ridership scenario with future dollars also gives the opportunity for that continued dialogue, as you all have mentioned, with the communities to say, there is a potential in these areas if you do these things. And if that's not what your community wants, that's okay too, but you need to realize that UTA is not going to be able to run efficient high ridership service to that area unless there's the land use patterns to support it.
And I think there's going to have to be some, trade-offs, because, I was meeting with the city council in Salt Lake County yesterday, and the mayor said, we're building this current road between 90th and about 78th South. It was in Midvale, but we're planning to add 3,500 residential units here shortly. In 2 years, we probably should have something that mirrors and connects through there. And it probably means us committing a couple years in advance, so that if the community is in fact going to permit and create that kind of density, and I'm confident more will follow, somehow we sort of have this joint sort of, here's what life will look like in 2 years. If you do this, we'll do this thing. Because if you don't do it somewhat in a similar time frame, then it sort of loses its ability to lend itself. So I think we have to think strategically that way.
Thank you for taking this seriously, being so thoughtful about it. Congratulations on starting to feel like you're kind of coalescing around some thoughts on this. I know it's hard, and so I appreciate you taking the time to be so thoughtful and make sure you make the right decision. So we appreciate it.
I think that unless there's other questions, we'll move on to our next item, which is the bus stop master plan. And your
Thank you.
I'm going to have GJ and Robert come join me. You don't have to say anything. I just want to acknowledge you. Unless you want to say something.
She's saying you don't have to say anything, but I bet you get turned to at some point, so.
They're both extremely shy.
I just want to have these guys here because they have both done, and actually Joe Taylor, who is Joe here? No, he's not. Have done a lot of work on our bus stop program, and Robert in particular is one of those kind of hidden gems within UTA. He flies a little under the radar. He's out in the system all the time, and is probably one of our most passionate and dedicated employees. And so this is a fun opportunity for me to recognize him and all of their work on this. So the Bus Stop Master Plan, as you recall, is one of several pieces within this toolbox of service planning tools that we have been developing. I'll go over this quickly. But, you know, our bus stops are really the front door to UTA's transit system. A lot of communities don't have a train station. A bus stop is their access to UTA. It is people's first impression of UTA. It is our way of showing that we're a part of their communities. And we could do a little bit better job with some of our bus stops. Robert will probably correct this slide, but as I know, we have 6,274 bus stops. Is that correct? Yes. He knows all of this off the top of his head in our system right now. Interestingly, 96% of all of the activity takes place at just 50% of those stops. So we have a lot of stops that are very, very heavily used and a lot that get very minimal use. We have 4,551 non-ADA compliant stops in the system, and that's a daunting number, 73%. It's important to know that the ADA Act was put into place in 1990, and most of our bus stops have been in place prior to that. They are grandfathered in. We're not out of current compliance, but we've been grandfathered in, but we can do a better job. The wheelchair ramp deployments at these stops equal 143,000. So that's a lot of people using wheelchairs at stops that are not compliant. And as we know, there are a lot of people who have no other way to get around, and so it's really important that we're doing a better job for them. Similarly, 2,039 of those are located on grass, dirt, or gravel without a connecting sidewalk. So even if the bus stop itself has a concrete pad, getting there may not be possible for a lot of people. And this is an image of one of our lackluster bus stops that we could do a little bit better job at. Fortunately, we have a good plan to correct some of those. Some interesting benefits. So GJ pulled this information together, but one of our former board members, Keith Bartholomew, happens to be a professor at the University of Utah College of Planning and Architecture, and he and a graduate student completed a study a couple years ago that measured a 2% increase in ridership at stops that had been improved along 2nd South and 39th South. And most interestingly, they saw a 4% reduction in paratransit demand in the areas with improved stops. So by improving them, we're moving people off of the much more expensive paratransit service and onto our regular fixed route bus system, which is exactly what we want to see happen. We have in our bus stop master plan a series of different levels of amenities for bus stops. This is based on bus stop activity at this, how many people are getting on and off and how many routes are connecting through a particular bus stop. You can see levels 4 through 6 here. They go above and below that as well. But let's see if I can find my notes here. 53%, so the vast majority of our bus stops are levels 1 or 2. So that is just a concrete pad, a sign, and at a level 2, there's also a bench. So that's 53%. That is what we're recommending. We don't think that we need anything more at those stops. However, 23% of the stops should be a level 5 or above. So those are our busiest stops, those 50% that are getting 90% of the activity. We think should have a little bit higher level of service. So for an example of cost, this is the average cost for a bus stop. It kind of ranges between $18,000 to $20,000 per stop, keeping in mind that there's such a huge spectrum from the level 6 that you see there to just a concrete pad. So this is probably a level 4 cost estimate here, but you'll see about $17,000 per stop. So they are not cheap. but the impact that they make on the community is dramatic. The Bus Stop Master Plan talks about a lot of best practices, both stop spacing, sighting, and also our customer experience. As I mentioned, this is our people's front door to the transit system, and so having a safe area where they feel comfortable, maybe it's heated in certain times of the year if it's a super high use stop, and having the right information available to know how to plan their trip and navigate the system. We also have some standard designs. And a really key piece of this, oh, go
I
ahead.
apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to know really quick, that last picture, was that a 1?
What was that? Oh,
Is this a 1?
This is a level 2,
It's a level 2.
actually. Yeah,
Thank you.
because it has a trash can and a bench. So level 1 would just be the pole and the concrete. So a key piece of this plan is a prioritization. Well, obviously, we have a big task to do, and we have limited resources. So how do we know where to put our resources to make the biggest bang for the buck and the biggest impact to the community? And so we look at a bunch of factors here, from compliance, the activity at the stop, safety, are we serving Title VI civil rights communities, how many people are using the stop, wheelchair ramp deployments, and putting our resources in the places where they make the biggest impact. We have some funding available for bus stops, which is remarkable and exciting for us. And Robert has just been grinning from ear to ear about this. But we have a grant in the Timpanogos Business Unit for $675,000. It's a federal grant. We are matching that with $50,000 from UTA's dollars. We have the Salt Lake County fourth quarter budget proposal, which is putting potentially $1 million a year towards bus stops. And if you project out our capital budget, so our UTA dollars, Salt Lake County fourth quarter money, and this grant, we have in the next 5 years just under $12 million that we can put towards bus stops. That's exciting. The sad part of it is that accomplishes only 9% of the problem. So it's a huge investment, a very important investment, and it's going to make a really big difference, but it doesn't make a huge dent in the overall pie. But, you know, it's a great start. It's far more than we've ever had, and we're really excited. So that brings us towards 9% of the stops that we need to address, and 11% of those that are non-ADA compliant, and about 524 stops.
Do you have a sense of, and I was thinking back to your prior figure of, 50% of the stops take almost.
Oh, yeah,
100%.
96,
How much of the ridership does that 11%?
We could calculate that. One thing to note is that we are addressing the highest need stops first.
Yeah.
And the highest need stops have typically the most amenities. So the money doesn't go as far at first. It's kind of like when you're paying on a mortgage, right? You pay all the interest up front, and then you really start paying down the principal quickly. Once we take care of the highest need stops, our money's going to go a lot further in the future. And so we'll be able to really just bang through a whole bunch of them because they'll be less expensive. Just a quick pie chart of where the stops will be located within the 5-year budget. Obviously, our fourth quarter funding from Salt Lake County is the majority of our revenue. Therefore, the majority of the stop improvements will occur in that area. And this is an interesting opportunity for us that has come up. I think we have a great opportunity to leverage our dollars. We are working right now with Taylorsville on an agreement. They're reconstructing a section of Redwood Road. And they said, you know what, we want to do some bus stops for you while we're doing that. So they're planning to improve 28 bus stops. They're asking us to maintain them if they build them. And I think that's a really good deal for us and such a huge impact for our customers. We have a programmed list of stops that we think that we'll start taking on first. But we have the ability, if a city or a private entity comes to us and says, hey, we'll leverage your dollars, we can modify that list to take care of those opportunities and stretch what we have. And so I think this is a great opportunity. It's going to be just one of probably several opportunities that pop up like this in the future. And then I want to end on a really pretty slide. This is what our future is going to look like. These are going to be concrete pads, nice shelters, but notice also the signage. We have a new bus stop wayfinding signage, maybe digital readers within the highest use bus stops, making sure that our customers have all the information they need to navigate our system and get where they need to go. And so with that, I have, Robert has one example that I'm going to put him on the spot, and you have to push the little button here. He sent me an email this morning about a bus stop that had 8 different safety incidences of a mirror hitting a telephone pole or something. And would you just run through the numbers that you mentioned to me earlier today?
Yes, so like she mentioned, there's 8 we've had accidents with the poles. However, now with funding and the bus stop master plan, we'll be able to, it's cost the agency at minimum $13,000. And so it's just kind of the definition of insanity. You keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different outcome. And it's something that we were never able to identify until we have our bus stop master plan. And it really allows us to focus in on an individual stop level. However, the cost to relocate this, and this particular case will be level 2, is we don't have to procure right away, so we're looking at about $3,000. So moving forward, some of these stop applications will literally be saving the agency tens of thousands of dollars. And also just that interruption in service is something I couldn't quantify. But for those 8 instances, the bus has had to go out of service. Operations supervisor has to respond. Mechanics pulled off his work from the shop, takes a bus from the yard, goes to wherever it needs to go. And so it's important. So like Laura says, it sounds like a lot of money where we're not making a big impact initially, but there are some impacts felt. And even if it doesn't mean concrete, Salt Lake City sent me an email this morning, and they put no parking signs at a bus stop where we've been having, again, a lot of accidents. And so it's sometimes just a few $100s for a sign will be saving the agency. And this, we've actually had 6 incidents at this particular stop up in Sugar House, and all required was no parking. But again, until the bus stop master plan came along, it was literally a planner would just go out and hopefully come across something where with this document we're able to, at the click of a button, it just brings this information right to our attention. So
Thanks, Robert. And GJ's really taken a good leadership role in putting this master plan together, and I'm incredibly grateful for his organizational skill set and the way he's been able to pull this together and make it really objective. I think that's one of the best things about this plan is that it takes out any perceived or implicit bias in where we update things. I think I don't want to speculate too much because I wasn't here, but I think a lot of our bus stop improvements were fairly reactionary in the past. When somebody would call and complain, then we'd scrunch up the money to go take care of it. In this way, we are very objectively looking at where the greatest needs are and putting our resources there.
That's great. I had a quick question.
Let me go to Beth and then Ken.
So going back to actually the slide that has the Taylorsville agreement on it, I'm just wondering if this translates in a way that could be productive. How do those businesses, not the community, I know you guys talked to Taylorsville City, but how do those businesses know that they could be a contributor of some kind to an enhanced bus stop? Do we do like any communications with them while we're in, like just using Taylorsville as an example? Do we talk to any of those businesses that could be impacted? How does that work?
In this case, we have not done that because the city had the money to just take care of it all already. So we have an example where there is a service change that we'd really like to make. We think it'd be good for our customers, it will serve more people, but we need a new bus stop in order to make it happen. And we haven't been able to implement the service change. This is in Murray by Select Health. We haven't been able to implement the service change because we haven't had the resources for the bus stop. Now that we do, I think we have the opportunity to go to Select Health and say, hey, we'll throw in 50% of the cost of this bus stop. If you as a private entity will throw in the other 50%, we'll be able to make the service change, which is better for our customers as a whole and specifically for the employees of this particular business. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that. Robert was just showing me an example of a photograph that the state capitol would like to see at their bus stops. And so I think we have a similar opportunity with the state to say, okay, and at your business or office buildings in the Capitol building, could we partner on these things as well? Amazon actually went out and just built a bus stop all on their own before they even contacted us and said, oh, hey, by the way, could you have a bus come to us and serve this area? And so we had to sort of, okay, thank you for building a bus stop. Now let's figure out what the process is to actually bring the bus to you. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for us there. We will need to be fairly proactive. And I think we have a great opportunity to talk to the local governments as they are reconstructing streets, or if a development is happening in their community, say, if you're out pouring concrete already for your development, do you mind just doing 12 pad for us right here? It doesn't cost them a whole lot doing their project, and they've got the trucks out there already. So I think there's lots of opportunities to work more closely.
Can I just add to that? There is a process where when we need the land at the location that's being recommended, all of these are existing stops and they're already in front of businesses that will be approached, and either from either the perspective to let them know that the property's going to be improved, or maybe we need to purchase some small portion of right of way if it's going to like level 4, 5, or 6 bus stop. We need the real estate for that. So yeah. I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's basically we do engage the local property owners and the businesses.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
The next slide showed that very nice slide up in the right-hand corner of that shelter is some kind of communication about when the bus is coming. Mm-hmm. What would it cost to or even if the capability is even there to provide that kind of information at our bus stops?
I'm going to kick that to GJ.
Sure.
Do we even have the technology developed yet to be able to communicate that? I mean, the GPS system is in all of our buses. We know where they're at. Is there a way to communicate that?
There is, and we're actually proactively working on that. There was a CMAQ grant awarded to the Salt Lake and Weber Davis area roughly in the ballpark of about $1.2 million. And we're piloting this technology. The first places that we'll probably reach out to are the hubs, the bus bays at the intermodal hubs for that very reason. There's data, there's power. We can pilot and test technology. These types of applications where we'd be in a city's right-of-way, we'd have to work a little harder to get those resources, the power and the data there. But there are solutions. There's solar solutions, there's cellular solutions, but we really want to test the technology at a place that's kind of bulletproof. And so you'll start to see those probably next spring at a few key intermodal locations.
Thank you very much.
Just to add to that a little bit, would you come back to us and let us know, hey, we've started to do this? I think that would be great information for us, so thanks.
In a recent legislative interim committee, we had a state senator ask an age-old question that I've dealt with in other contexts many times. Well, does the east side have more bus stops or facilities than the west side? And obviously, we look at equity issues as part of Title VI, but I just wondered if you had, and you were kind enough to furnish a map, are they signs in grass versus something more robust? And I just wondered if you have any sense of an equity component to it. And having said that, I used to have conversations with my former constituents, and 5/7 of Salt Lake City, for example, lives on the east side of the city. So if you have a denser population, you're probably going to have much more bus options. And so I just wondered whether you have a sense of that equity balance.
Yeah, I had a heads up that this might be a topic, so I've got a few stats for you. And I think, again, I'll just want to reiterate that having this plan allows us to be objective and take out any bias in any geography our decision making. It's really about use and need. So moving forward, that's where we are. The map that I shared with you shows the top 200 stops to be improved, our top priorities in Salt Lake County. 95 of those are west of I-15, so 47%, and 105 are east of I-15, so 52%, where the more kind of urban core of Salt Lake City is. So that's our plan moving forward.
Is that Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County?
That's Salt Lake County.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's our plan moving forward, is just about 50-50 on either side. Again, very driven by objective criteria on need. So as our total bus stops in Salt Lake County, we have 1,768 stops on the west side of the county, west of I-15, and we have 1,949 stops east of I-15. So 48% on the west, 52% on the east. Keeping in mind that the vast majority of the use of the bus stops occurs at only about half of the stops, and those are typically in the northern half of the county rather than the southern half. Yeah. Again, that ridership coverage question again. There is, in looking at that, if our stops are fairly evenly distributed, the ADA accessibility benches and shelters are more heavily weighted on the east side. So there is, from a purely geographic perspective, there are more amenities on the eastern side of the valley than there is on the western side, but a lot of that is also based on density of jobs, density of housing, the number of routes that are connecting at a particular stop, again, based on need. So I think in the past, that perhaps it was maybe not as equitable as it could be, although I'm sure that it was all very much based on where the biggest needs were at the time. Moving forward, I think we have a really objective process to make sure that any opportunity for bias doesn't occur, because we're really thoughtful about it. And the plans that we have laid out right now are fairly even between both sides, but it's all based on need. In the past, though, we do have nicer amenities on the east side. I hate to say it. Oh, yes. And actually, in the 2019 program of the funding that we are allocating to bus stops that you just approved at your last meeting, 75% of those stops are either on or west of State Street. Okay. If you look at I-15, it's 17 on the west and 27 on the east. But I believe State Street was the corridor that was mentioned by the senator. So.
Okay, great. Thank you for that that deeper analysis there. Any other questions on this item? Okay. Oh, Ken.
Just simply to congratulate you on the report. We got that report, read through it, very detailed about the improvements that can and will be made. It was just very well done. Thank you very much for that.
These guys make me look really good. It's all them.
The one last thing I would throw out there, and I'm sure we're making this available through some kind of GIS layer. I think back as cities go through their capital planning process, the more that we can educate them or take advantage of even, I know the planners get together, quarterly, letting them know to look at these resources. There are, as you point out, a lot of joint projects that could be advantageous to us as well as them. So
I agree.
That'd be great.
This is a great opportunity to put something on our new open data portal as well, so that we could do that. And coordinating more with local governments is a big goal for me for the next few months. So that's where we'll target.
All right. Hey, thank you. Our nearly last item, but very important one, is our health and wellness program report, and have Kim Ulibarri and Jacob Gomez here. And
thank you so much for letting us come and talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing the last few years here at UTA to emphasize the importance of employee health as it relates to the service that we provide. Of course, our employee health is important to us because it impacts how they interact with our customer, being at the workplace, and just impacts their quality of life as a whole. In addition to that, of course, providing a good, robust healthcare package is a significant investment from the UTA for our employees, and we want to be able to continue to maintain a good healthcare package. So over the past few years, Oh, thank you. We have been implementing, we put together in 2012 a long-term strategic plan for approaching our healthcare with that focus on employee health as well as cost management. And in 2012, our previous board and executive leadership team worked together with our Total Rewards group to identify some major rollouts that we would do over a 5-year period to try to improve both the employee health and the cost increases that were happening at that time. As you all are aware, organizations were seeing significant increases in those healthcare packages. So we started with a recommendation to do the 5 things that you see in front of you. We agreed to redesign our wellness program and really emphasize proactive management of disease, proactive disease management. We planned to implement premium differentials, which incentivized folks to participate in our wellness program. So if you participate in wellness, you have a lower premium. We also paid attention to our plan design in our fully insured plans to see how behaviors such as using the emergency room, trying to drive behaviors away from the emergency room into, the clinics that, I can't remember what they're called, the clinics, not the emergency room, but the other clinics that, are open all the time. And then we did have a full plan to bring on an on-site clinic and talked about possibly instituting a high deductible healthcare plan. Since then, we have accomplished all of those things, except we have not, and by choice, instituted a high deductible healthcare plan. So Jake's going to talk a little bit about what we did over the last few years in those areas.
Thank you, Kim. With the strategic implementation of a few of these things, there's the items that you see up there, but a few things I really want to focus on, specifically predictive modeling, the ability to strategically keep your healthy people healthy. I think that's a big slip that occurs with health and wellness programs and insurance programs in general, is you allow those people to not be monitored and to get sick, and then that basically contributes to the premiums overall. So that predictive modeling, allowing those morbidities and comorbidities, so issues and additional issues with those to increase is a big thing that we focused on overall. So that goes hand in hand with disease management. The disease management overall allows people that are moderate or high risk overall to actually reduce and to get into that low risk category. It affects insurance premiums. You can focus on those high claims costs, and then you can actually put together a strategy to move forward and to institute additional plan designs to reduce your costs overall. But a big thing that Kim and I obviously focus on is not just the actual premium reduction, it's the quality of life for the employee. I think one big thing that I've seen since I've been at UTA for the last 3 years is people are now understanding the holistic medicine versus just, hey, I get a reduction in my insurance premium. The fact that they now have a better quality of life, that they can take hikes, play with their children, things of that nature. And I think that's very important as well. And we strive to continually focus on that.
One of the key pieces of the strategy over the last few years was bringing on our on-site clinic. And we have 2 clinics right now, one here at our headquarters and one at our Meadowbrook facility. And our employees can use those clinics at 0 cost, and we do our wellness program out of those clinics. The focus for the clinic is, again, disease management and to help people proactively manage conditions that can result in high claims in your fully insured plan. So we have quite a bit of diabetes support in our, or prevention and support focus in our clinics. You can get sleep apnea tests for free in those clinics, and that not only helps the employee with their out-of-pocket cost, it also reduces the utilization on our fully insured plan. So we've seen about 85% of our employees to date have used the clinic at least one time. And one of our major goals is to make the clinic something that is a better choice for folks than maybe waiting to get into their primary care physician. Our clinic can do all primary care as well as wellness visits. So we are trying to drive participation there. As I said before, that just helps people with chronic conditions to manage their diseases, and that helps reduce claims as a whole.
So overall, you need a wellness program in order to help people. You can't just, go through the same motions and expect things to change. As you can see, in 2015, it was instituted with just about 17% enrollment participation, and we've increased to 57 to 54% around that area currently. I think the biggest challenge and what we've taken on strategically is actually to educate employees more than anything else. As we'll speak about later on, we actually do have a new partner that has assisted us with this. We like to be data informed and not data driven. I think a lot of the times if you focus too much on the data, you lose the actual human perspective with the employee. And so a big part of that goes back to the predictive modeling overall and our disease management. Employees that participate in the wellness program, it's just basically stated to the data have a better quality of life overall. So again, we are implementing different strategies to get more people involved, better educated, so we can increase those percentages in the wellness program.
And with that, this next slide talks about some more hard numbers on the differences in cost in our fully insured plans on folks who are participating in wellness. So we track all of this data at a very high aggregate level. We do not get individual employee information that's managed through a vendor for us, but just our general claims costs are higher for folks who are not participating in the wellness program than those who are, both in general claims and pharmacy claims. And of course, this impacts long-term the renewal rates that come with our fully insured plans. And we've seen UTA's renewal rates come about 4.6% under the average Utah renewal rate over the last 5 to 6 years. So it's slow. We're managing how fast our costs are growing, and with that, we are managing how healthy our population is.
Moving forward in 2019, as I previously stated, we do have a new vendor, Care ETC, that has come in. I know all of you did a tour of the clinic initially when you first started, and so overall, it's just redefining that return on investment and value of investment of the clinic itself. Again, you want to make sure that you're tracking that. We are tracking that and putting together different strategies to move forward and just provide better service and just better health overall. As Kim had stated, just currently the trend overall, we're 4.6% under the Utah trend per both of our carriers currently. So it shows that it's definitely making an impact. Again, with that new clinic partner, I get a lot of questions of why did we switch. With them, they provide a lot, just a better, more innovative data set, which allows us to take from that initial strategy that was implemented over the last 4 to 5 years and move forward with it and actually, go beyond where we are currently. So overall, just a redesigned wellness program. If you see now, we do have a split between admin and bargaining employees. This is a pilot program for an outcomes-based with the admin population. So you will see that difference there. What that allows them to do is, on a longevity scale, basically shoot for a result next year versus doing like 90-day increments, which did provide a return, but innovatively, I think this is the direction we should be moving in overall.
I think just to summarize, I want to say, contextually, in 2011, on-site healthcare was very limited, and so a lot of this, looking back, seems pretty. It's not standard, but there are a lot more employers who are going in this direction now. But when we had this plan put in place in 2011, 2012, and rolled out these things, we were a bit ahead of the curve so we didn't have real clear metrics identified back in those earlier years on how we would identify success. Our major metric is really how much have we reduced the growth, and we measure that against the Utah trend. As we move forward, that focus on data and metrics has become much more sophisticated. Our partners, our new clinic partner, as well as our benefits consultant, and our healthcare providers are much more sophisticated in how we can share data across the different options that we have and really look at that predictive modeling moving forward. Once we get through 2019, our first year with this new vendor, we will have a much broader look and a much more detailed look at where we need to head over the next 5 years from now. But we do know that driving folks to our on-site clinics, getting them in earlier rather than later, and helping them and supporting them in managing disease or preventing disease is really going to help us accomplish both the focus on employee health and keeping those costs down. So we will, in early 2020, have a revised kind of new 5-year strategic plan that'll be more metrics focused and have some clearer measures on where we're going next.
Great. Any questions? The only question I have is, and I remember a discussion earlier, but do you anticipate as you look at the future that there's a high deductible option, or is the philosophy still that it doesn't serve us well?
We are looking at it as we speak. We're always looking at it. It was rejected in that in the past due to just the complexity of the rollout and some of the challenges with managing that type of healthcare insurance. But we've already been in contact again with our vendors about how could we make this work in conjunction with the other strategies that are coming up. So we'll always be evaluating that.
Okay. I would encourage it, not that it's the cure-all solution, and the focus on overall wellness is certainly of utmost importance. I just think it's an interesting option in the mix, and whether we have the ability to offer it or not, will obviously come from the work that you're doing.
Yeah. No, I do appreciate that, and it's not something we've outright rejected. It's just been more about where does it fit in the strategy, and so we can keep you apprised of that research as we're moving forward.
Sounds great. Thank you for the report. Appreciate your efforts there.
Thanks.
A reminder that our next meeting that will be, we won't have a meeting next week, so our next meeting will be in 2 weeks on August the 21st. I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session for the discussion and strategy for collective bargaining.
So moved.
Second?
Have a motion and a second to go into closed session, which will be held at the cabin conference room and just outside of here. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes, and so we'll excuse ourselves and go into closed session. Okay. All right, we're back from our closed session, and that leads us to the final action of the day, which is adjournment. Ask for motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.